Welcome. This is presentation number 11 in our series Rereading the Fourth Gospel. We are reading a story about Jesus the Revealer. And the title for the topic today, presentation number 11, covers chapter 11 in the Gospel. And the title is Take Away the Stone. So, where are we? At the end of chapter 10, Jesus is in Jerusalem, the feast of the dedication. The pressure is building. And we read, then they tried to arrest him again, but he escaped from their hands. He went away again across the Jordan to the place where John had been baptizing earlier, and he remained there. So we are accustomed to looking at the map, and here is the map. He is here. That got me wrong. Let's see. Why did that happen? Let's see now. He was here in Jerusalem, and he goes back to most likely this place here, although there is another option here or on this side. But if this is the place that our author has in mind for where Jesus goes to where John was baptizing, then he goes back to the beginning. That's where the story began in chapter 1. So he is there in some ways in hiding, or in some ways in retreat, because, as I said, the pressure is building. And then our story begins here in chapter 11. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. Here is an example of rereader advantage. We are reading chapter 11 in the Gospel of John. The story of Mary's anointing of Jesus' feet is in chapter 12. So our narrator kindly informs us of that. But you and I, as rereaders, we don't need that. We know that that is coming. We have figured this out because we became rereaders and know what is ahead and can take advantage of that as we now read for the second time. And just as an aside here on the names, Richard Bauckham, one of my mentors, makes a big point of the names in the Gospel of John. So many individuals are named. So many individuals that appear in the synoptic Gospels without names are named in the Gospel of John. And these names, Mary, Martha, Lazarus, are very common names in the time when this story happens. They are among the most common names, especially Mary and also Martha. But Lazarus is also a very common name. So the sister sent a message to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is ill. And the connotation here of this story is that Jesus has a special relationship to this family, to these siblings. He is a frequent guest. He is a guest in their home in the synoptics too. And Lazarus, Mary, Martha, or however you will do it in this painting from the 16th century, and obviously not depicting a scene at the time of when it happened. This is a scene from medieval Europe, but we get the idea. We are able to make that sort of translation. Now, there is a then and a now in this story that lies ahead, and I thought, should I put this slide earlier or later? I'm putting it early. And the author is a scholar now, she in her 80s, Sandra Schneiders, she has written extensively on the Gospel of John, especially on this chapter and on the topic of spirituality, the difference between theology and spirituality, and we should commend her for that, and this is her book. Here she says, in chapter 11, the story of Jesus and that of the Johannine community are completely fused in a touchingly human narrative that opens onto the experience of any believing Christian who has ever lived through the death of a loved one. There is some recognition value in this story to our own experiences, and I would say not necessarily just any believing Christian, but anyone can find something that is sort of that awakens contact with our own experience. And let me just say what they are. There is, of course, the disruption of death itself, how we experience death, how it intrudes on our lives, the loss of the dear person who was there, but now is gone, and seems gone for good. And I have worked as a doctor for many years. I have also worked in a sort of semi-pastoral role in a church community. I have seen people die in the hospital many times. I have gone in the early morning hours to bedsides. The patient was alive yesterday. Today he is dead. And I have always walked slowly in those moments, always paused outside the door and walked inside and stood by the bedside of the deceased person and always felt, this is solemn. I will never get used to it. And now at the tail end of my medical career, I can say I never got used to it. And I have also conducted funerals. I have sometimes afterwards regretted that I did it. I wasn't strong enough. I just entered into other people's grief, and it just seemed too big for me, as it were. So we have the disruption of death itself. And then we have, and this is a big point in the story, we have the sense of God's absence in the story. The sense of God's absence in this story made more intense by Jesus' delayed response. He doesn't come right away. And in this story, this is in some ways the main stumbling block, as we shall see. So let's heed her point that we are reading a story that is ancient, about an experience that is present and contemporary. So, but when Jesus heard it, Lazarus is ill. When Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. And this is the only time when he will, in some ways, refer to himself in the third person as the Son of God. And we have two words here that we want to explain. The word is glory and glorified, and here is the Greek, and there are two options, because we don't use that word in usual speech. We don't say, oh, that was, well, sometimes we say that was glorious, but we don't say about another person that I want to glorify you. And I have asked my students sometimes, have you glorified someone today? And the closest we could get to doing that is that when we speak highly of someone, when we speak well of someone, when we praise them. So what does the Greek word doxazo mean? What options does it give us? To influence one's opinion about another so as to enhance the latter's reputation. Praise, honor, extol. That's one option. And the other one is to cause to have splendid greatness, clothed in splendor, glorify. Well, the option that works best here is to change our opinion about someone. To maybe if our opinion of that person is low, when maybe we hold that person in low esteem. Sometimes we might even hold God in low esteem. Then something happens and we change our view of that person. It's similar to what Jesus will say here when he heals the man born blind. Neither this man nor his parents sinned. He was born blind so that God's works may be revealed in him. The blindness here and the illness here, God will do something in those settings, and it will be to God's glory. And here we also have the revealer in our story, addressing various states of human need, and there is a kind of rising trajectory to what he will do. Let's see how it goes. It begins with no wine at the wedding. It continues with thirst at the well. There is debility at the pool in Bethsaida. There is hunger at the lake and the feeding of the 5,000. There is sin in the city and the woman caught in adultery, taking that story at face value. And there is hypocrisy in the city. Both some needs, and Jesus will address them. And then there is blindness in the city. Blindness at two levels, a man born blind and people also, even theological people, who can't see. And then we come here to illness and death. So these aren't they, states of human need that are occasions for Jesus to intervene and to show his glory. So we read on. Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. Yet after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. This doesn't look good. This is a problem. If you are a doctor and someone is seriously ill, it will not look good on your resume if you don't show up and take action right away. If you are a pastor or a priest, it will not look good if you don't come. And maybe that is the person you would most like to have in a state where there is, life-threatening illness. So here is reality, as claimed in the text. Reality is that Jesus loved Martha and her sister. That's what claims to be what the text claimed. But at the level of perception, you might just have a problem. It might seem that is, does he really love us? That could be. And so here he is then. Bethany, the place of where they are, is here. And this is the place most likely where Jesus is. It takes a while to get the message to him. And then he delays 2 more days. And he will come. So we have in the message, we have the expectation that he will come right away. Don't we have that? They send a message, he's ill. They expect him to come right away. It is an expectation unmet because he delays. And at the level of perception, Jesus' absence threatens maybe, or puts at risk his trustworthiness. There is a sort of a dissonant thing there that might happen. And here I am reading something I said myself once at the funeral of a dear friend when I was talking and using the text that we are reading here. The wait begins. Lazarus' condition takes a turn for the worse. They pace the floor. They look out the window. They look anxiously at each other. They check the brother's pulse. They watch his breathing. They try to console him and one another. Jesus is surely on his way. He will soon be here. All will be well. But there is no knock on the door. There is no sign of the dear familiar figure down the road, and they begin to wonder, did he not get the message? Is anything holding him back? Why is he not coming as expected? Those are sentiments, those are things that happen. We have two scenes in the story. We have the scene of Jesus and his disciples over here, and we have the scene of the sick room in Bethany over here, and there should be a connection. And then after this he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. The disciples said to him, Rabbi, the Jews were just now trying to stone you, and are you going there again? Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Those who walk during the day do not stumble, because they see the light of this world. Him. But those who walk at night stumble, because the light is not in them. And then he will go. And yes, they think he is putting himself at risk. And yes, he is putting himself at risk. He will go from here, and he will go here, and let's see what happens. After saying this, he told them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going there to awaken him. And now we see how the worlds diverge again, the conceptual worlds. His reference point is different than their reference point. I am going there to awaken him. The disciples said to him, Lord, if he has fallen asleep, he will be all right. Jesus, however, had been speaking about his death, but they thought that he was referring merely to sleep. So they don't understand his language, because Jesus is now transforming the vocabulary of life and death. It's a big thing. They think that now Lazarus is asleep, and it is the sleep of recovery, of getting well. And Jesus renames death as sleep. And so my illustration here is just someone falling apart and disintegrating as we do in death. So how does Jesus know that Lazarus is dead? This time it will not work for me to say that Jesus has superior powers of observation. Here he has to have superior sources of information. Here the sense that Lazarus is dead has to come to him not through some human channel, through some other supernatural channel that I will concede. I don't see much options here. There is a verse in the Synoptic Gospels of God's awareness of reality, God's awareness of life and death, even awareness of the death of animals, even the death of birds. Are not 2 sparrows sold for a penny? Yet not one of them will fall to the ground apart from awareness from your Father. This is Jesus speaking. And even the hairs of your head are all counted. So do not be afraid. You are of more value than many sparrows. This is the sort of God's awareness of what happens in the world and awareness of death. So, we can also then say, reading this text and looking at the transformation of the vocabulary of death, we can say, death asleep. That is death that under God isn't the end. You can count it as sleep. It is death, but under God it counts as sleep. And then there is death as death. That is death that is the end. That is the conventional understanding. But Jesus has now taken control of this vocabulary and said, describing someone who is dead, that he's asleep, and I'm going to wake him up. That's strange. Then Jesus said to them plainly, Lazarus is dead. For your sake I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe, but let us go to him. Thomas, who was called the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let us also go, that we may die with him. It's not like they are happy to go, but Jesus wants to go now. Lazarus is dead, and he is going there to wake him up, as though he is merely asleep. So, at the level of experience, Jesus is absent. At the level of reality, he is present, because how did he know that Lazarus? He's kept sort of tabs at his awareness that I am delaying on purpose, and I'm going there. Now he is dead. There is those strange elements in our story. When Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. And you cannot stop being amazed at how this gospel continually updates us on where we are on the map. Here is the town of Bethany outside Jerusalem, and here is Jerusalem, and the Mount of Olives here. And yes, I have been there. I have gone on a morning jog one morning in Jerusalem, and I ran to Bethany, and I sprained my ankle badly on the descent from Jerusalem into the Kidron Valley here, and I hobbled to Bethany, and I hobbled back, and I even took a picture of my ankle. It looks so horrible. But here we have a scene of raw grief, communal grief, that these people, this family, have friends, and they come to console the bereaved. And so it is a recognizable scene, a recognizable reality, and we have at the center of this grief, we have the 2 grieving sisters. So when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. That's a little strange. Why does Martha go only? Why doesn't Mary also go? Is there some difference in the way they process their grief? Jesus is coming. Maybe, that is, I think, a little strange. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. And there is ambiguity here, because there is a kind of accusatory thing. If you had been here, what kept you from coming? Why weren't you here? We were waiting for you. Lazarus was waiting for you. And Mary and I, we waited for you, and you didn't come. If only. That is the sort of disappointment side. And then there is that other side, the hopeful side. Well, even now I know that God will give you whatever she means by that. She hasn't totally given up hope. And then we have one of the strangest passages in all of this gospel, spelling out strange things. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. There is hope down the line, some point in the future, he will rise again. She has that hope. Not everyone, not all Jews at the time of Jesus believed in the resurrection. There was, and still is in religions, differences of opinion about that. But she belongs to the group that thinks that there is an afterlife. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. those who believe in me will live even though they die. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? We'll unpack it, or try to unpack it in a minute. She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. 3 things. That's what she believes. And Jesus has now moved resurrection from the future into the present. And he has moved resurrection from a date on the calendar and made it into his person. My not great illustration here is before they go to the tomb, and there are the sisters and Jesus appearing here. And so this point needs to be mentioned, because she says, I know that he will rise in the resurrection on the last day. You know, she looks at the clock, she looks at the calendar. At some point there will be the last day, and there will be a resurrection. That's the point. But Jesus changes that. When he says, I am the resurrection, he changes the focus from the calendar to his person. It's a strange move. And then, back to the vocabulary here. Let's see if we can do it. So, first he says, those who believe will live even though they die. So they will die, but it will be death asleep. Just as he said when he started saying, Lazarus has fallen asleep. And then whoever and all who live and believe will never die. That is a harder one. But that is death as no more than sleep. So will they not die? Yes, they will die. But they will only sleep. So there is the sting of death. The meaning of death will be different. All who live and believe will never die as in a sort of final sense. Okay, we need a little time out here. Time out to talk about women in John's Gospel. So here is Martha. And Martha's confession of Jesus is the most mature, most elaborate, highest level confession of trust or faith in Jesus anywhere in this Gospel. She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. Notice, it's a woman who says it. It's Martha. And this is theology. So, and it is spirituality too. Theology is something you teach, and spirituality is the appropriation of it, the sort of taking it into yourself. So she is a theologically astute person, and she's a spiritual person. That's what she comes across as here. She is at the top of the pyramid of insight, theological and spiritual insight, and she's a woman. And so women in the Gospel of John, and Sandra Schneider's that I quoted earlier, she is into that, and there are quite a few New Testament scholars in the US especially that are women, not only in the US. So here we have, I do it with pictures. So here we have Mary at the wedding, mother of Jesus, talking to him and engaging him at a significant level. Here we have the Samaritan woman at the well, and there is an in-depth conversation about spiritual things. Here we have the 2 sisters at Lazarus in Bethany. Here we have Mary in the next chapter when she anoints Jesus' feet. And so woman, 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 woman. And one more. Here is Mary Magdalene in chapter 20, after the resurrection. The first person to see Jesus after his resurrection is a woman. She is the conduit and the connecting link back to the disciples. So the interest in women and the status of women in the Gospel of John is a marvel. There is nothing like it in any religious sort of outlook. And even the religion that we call Christianity never figured this one out, because it became male priesthood, male teachers, women sequestered, women in the corner, and today, and even in my faith community till today, there is a huge struggle about the role of women in ministry. I say, read the Gospel of John and then go home, because it's all settled and finished. Jesus has used women as interlocutors for the highest perceptions and highest sort of level of insight here. Well, we need to go back to Bethany and our story. When she had said this, she went back and called her sister Mary and told her privately. These are interesting terms. The teacher is here and is calling for you. Why didn't she come out right away? Why does she need an extra sort of nudging, prodding to come out? Is grief so paralyzing? Is disappointment so severe that she can hardly move? That's possibility. And when she heard it, she got up quickly and went to him. Now Jesus, he is asking for her, he wants to see you. So then she gets up quickly. Now Jesus had not yet come to the village, but was still at the place where Martha had met him. So this is a slow motion. The whole story moves slowly, like a funeral procession in our time. And I found many illustrations of that, how we move slowly as communities when someone has passed away. In my childhood, in a village in Norway, as a child, I never went to a funeral. But my mother always did. And we could see the funeral procession moving from the church to the graveyard, always. And I thought this is strange. This is something that I found it hard to get used to. And then we go back to our story. The Jews who were with her in the house, consoling her, saw Mary get up quickly and go out. They followed her because they thought that she was going to the tomb to weep there. So they don't understand, because Martha has told her privately, but she's going out to meet Jesus. When Mary came to where Jesus was and saw him, she knelt at his feet and said to him, verbatim, what Martha said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And sense of absence. There is the sense of absence, if only. That is the thing. And they have been saying it these extra days, these 4 days since Lazarus died. Martha and Mary have been saying to each other, if he had only been here, if he had only been here, if I had only been here. So the first word when they see Jesus is this word, if only. That is very natural. It's not strange. So there is that a sense of of dislocation here. When Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who came with her also weeping, he was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. And here we have some translational challenges, because the sort of state of mind of Jesus. But we can sense, as this illustration tries to do, that that death is a profound dislocation in our lives, in the human level, in every level, also in human and in our relationship to God. And something stirs Jesus here. And this is from a commentary looking at the Greek terms here. And yet Jesus is twice described as being greatly disturbed. 2 verses. And weeping at the tomb of Lazarus. But if Jesus had known all along that Lazarus' illness will not lead to death, why does he weep at the tomb? And why is he greatly disturbed? What's going on here? Greatly disturbed renders the Greek enebrimesato from embrimaomai. And a lexicon says that it indicates anger and displeasure. Jesus is angry. Is that the state of mind? But it allows that embryomenos, also from that same verb, can mean deeply moved. Feelings of anger, feelings of grief. Both of those options seem to be there. It can mean, similarly, taraxen from tarasso, here translated as troubled, means to cause inward turmoil, stir up, disturb, unsettle. So something is happening inside Jesus in this occasion, and we wonder what it is. There will now be tears at the tomb of Lazarus. He said, "Where have you laid him?" They said to him, "Lord, come and see." And then we have a strange verse. It's the shortest one in the New Testament. Sentence. Jesus burst into tears, or Jesus wept. You can say it that way too. I have chosen a more dramatic translation. Jesus burst into tears. So here, among all these troubled, grieving people, there is Jesus also seeming to be in a state of grief. He cries, he weeps, he bursts into tears. So what do we make of that? One possibility, he experiences grief like we do. He participates in grief like we do. And then there is the possibility that other people's grief unlocks and magnifies our own. I have felt this when I have participated in other people's grief at funerals. Sometimes, and I have participated as an officially participated maybe, sometimes I have had to go off on my own retreat to process not just the grief of those people, but somehow my own grief came up, and the layers of protection disappeared. And Jesus has some reasons to grieve because of all the resistance he meets. So there could be grieving not over the deceased, but over people's resistance to his offer of healing and life. That horizon seems so clouded. Why is it so difficult? Or there could be something else, and here is one other thing that I think is really important and that I just discovered. This is from Joanne Brandt's commentary. This is Joanne Brandt. This is the book I am assigning to my students to read for this course, a commentary in the same series where I have written the commentary on the book of Revelation. And listen to what she ventures to say. In the Jewish context, Jesus' sorrow may be a sign of his divinity as much as his humanity. Now think about that for a moment. So Jesus as a human being could be grieving. But Jesus in the Gospel of John is the revealer of the kind of person God is. So do not rule out that when Jesus bursts into tears, he is revealing to us the kind of person God is. And so brought to view to our eyes is God's tears, God's grief. And the interest in tears in the Gospel of John and in the book of Revelation, where God at the end will wipe away all tears, is exceptional. So the notion here, and it isn't necessary to say in the Jewish context, in the context of the Gospel of John, where Jesus is the revealer, his sorrow, his tears, could express God's reality, God's sentiment, feelings about the human condition. So the Jews said, "See how he loved him." But some of them said, "Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying?" So there is the commendatory thing here. They see his tears, see how he loved him. Yeah. So there is a sense there that nothing more will happen. But anyway, at least he loved him. And then there is someone saying, well, why didn't he do something about it? And notice that in chapter 9 in the Gospel of John, Jesus had critics who criticized him for healing the blind. And now people are criticizing him. I assume it might be the same people who have forgotten that they criticized him for healing the blind and now criticize him for not doing something about Lazarus' illness. You're doomed if you do, and damned if you don't. In some contexts, that's how it works. Then Jesus, again greatly disturbed, came to the tomb. It was a cave, and a stone was lying against it. Jesus said, "Take away the stone." And that I made the title for my presentation, "Take Away the Stone." You don't usually do that, of course. That are strong terms for to disturb a person's tomb. And Martha knows it. Martha, the sister of the dead man, said to him, "Lord, already there is a stench, because he has been dead 4 days." And two pauses here, two sort of side glances to the meaning of this. One is from Joanne Brandt that I just quoted earlier. So death and the defenseless body. Because when the dead body is vulnerable, so we have ways to deal with that. The opening of the tomb would be an offense, not just to the people outside the tomb, but also to the body within. Defenseless bodies are placed in tombs or sealed in coffins to protect them from post-mortem abuse and the indignity of being seen. What cannot be seen cannot bring shame. This notion, the decomposing body, the dead body, needs to be shielded from exposure. When you take away the stone, you remove that sort of layer of protection. And here is one more from Craig Coaster, who's a great New Testament scholar who has written on John and on Revelation in one of his books here. He has a statement about the anthropology of life and death that I would like to give a broader exposure, but here is an excellent statement that captures the world view of the story that we are reading. Death affects the whole person, not simply a part of a person. The whole person dies, and the whole person is raised to a new life. This differs from the common idea that a person can be neatly divided into a body and a soul. According to this dualistic approach, death separates the body from the soul. The body dies, and the soul ascends to spiritual life in heaven. Jesus could have expressed the dualistic perspective by telling Martha, "Your brother's soul is now in heaven." Could have solved the problem that way. But he does not do so. Jesus' words treat Lazarus as a whole person who has now died and who has the promise of rising to a new life. Now, this view by this scholar is not the usual view that people, even Christian scholars, would have in times past. This is a change from a dualistic view that used to be deeply held among Christians too, to a more monist, holistic view of the person. Death is real in this story. He's been in the grave for 4 days. He is decomposing. There is a stench coming from the grave. Don't touch it. So the person, Lazarus, is here, not in heaven, as it were. So Jesus said to her, "Did I not tell you that if you believe you would see the glory of God?" So they took away the stone. And Jesus looked upward and said, "Father, I thank you for having heard me. I knew that you always hear me, but I have said this for the sake of the crowd standing here, so that they may believe that you sent me." When he had said this, he cried with a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." I wish I could do it. I'd like to try it out at what decibel he says it. I wish we could do it here. I won't. You try it in your imagination. Where you are, try it out 2 or 3 times and see till you find the right sort of level of decibel, the words. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound with strips of cloth, and his face wrapped in a cloth. Jesus said to them, "Unbind him and let him go." And we will notice, and rereaders will know, that Lazarus seems to have been buried in circumstances similar to what we have at the burial of Jesus. I want to show you a few illustrations. This is Duccio from Siena in Italy, painting in the 14th century the story of the raising of Lazarus here in that style of painting of that day. And this is a more famous painting. This is one of Rembrandt's early works, painting the raising of Lazarus with Jesus here, and one of the sisters here, and another sister here. And no one can illuminate a scene like Rembrandt. And the face most brightly illuminated is the face of one of Lazarus' sisters. And then we have Van Gogh, and I have been debating about with myself who I like the best, Rembrandt or Van Gogh. Van Gogh is in the 19th century, and he's also Dutch, and he paints ordinary scenes. Not so often does he paint religious scenes, but the times when he does it, we have here first Lazarus there in the tomb, and then we have no Jesus here. We only have the sisters seeing him come back to life. It is pretty amazing. Well, we need to round this off. I will skip a few verses, but we will read most of the verses in chapter 11. There is evidence now for Jesus raising the dead, and then there is a reaction. The reaction isn't as though the reaction doesn't seem to fit the evidence. Many of the Jews, therefore, who had come with Mary and had seen what Jesus did, believed in him, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what he had done. There is reporting here. There is a kind of someone as though they have spied on him, and the threat to Jesus has not diminished. It has, in some ways, gotten worse. So the chief priests and the Pharisees called a meeting of the council, and they said, "What are we to do? This man is performing many signs. If we let him go on like this, everyone will believe in him, and the Romans will come and destroy our holy place and our nation." But one of them, Caiaphas, who was high priest that year, said to them, "You know nothing at all. You do not understand that it is better for you to have one man die for the people than to have the whole nation destroyed." The man who will die for the people is the person who can restore everyone to life. So here we have a strange logic. It is Johannine irony, the notion of the greater good. It's better if that happens, and the greater good isn't the greater good. So Jesus therefore no longer walked about openly among the Jews, but went from there to a town called Ephraim in the region near the wilderness, and he remained there with his disciples. This is the last time when he will leave the Jerusalem area and go somewhere. We don't know for sure where Ephraim is. Someone has put it on the map there. And the next time he comes back to Jerusalem, he comes to die. We'll do our retrospective. The signs in the gospel takes us to various stations of human need, It begins at a wedding, it ends at death and the grave. Human need, a progression of human need, you might say. The hope of resurrection is in John not anchored in a day on the calendar, but in a person. Resurrection is an I. I am the resurrection. The people in the story, much beloved by Jesus, experience death the way we experience it. It is, as Hendra Schneider says, death in the community of eternal life. And our communities also wish to be that kind of community. Jesus embarks on the journey to Bethany. It's a life-bringing journey, aware of real risk to himself. And the last point, his giving of life happens within the story of a life given. His life.